Morning, everyone. I'm David Wegge. I'm the interim dean of the Schneider School of Business and Economics here at St. Norbert College. We're delighted to welcome all of you to campus this morning to discuss the economic impact of the repurposing of the Green Bay Correctional Institution. This project represents a very exciting possibility for the village of Allouez and for the greater Green Bay area. I want to thank President Brian Breeze and Dean Jeff Frick for joining us this morning, and want to thank them for their support for the Schneider School and all the work that we do in the Schneider School. One of the hallmark values of the Norbertine Order is communio. Communio encourages us to respond individually and collectively to the needs of our local and global communities. The Schneider School embraces communio through our vision to be the intellectual hub for business, government, and nonprofits as they strive to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens in our communities. The Center for Business and Economic Analysis is one unit of the Schneider School of Business and Economics that lives that vision and that value of communio. We're fortunate to have the CBEA led by Dr. Mark Shaffer. Mark and his staff have successfully carried out a complex project under a tight timeline. So thank you, Mark, and congratulations to you, Dr. Sandy Oderzinski, and Alexa Schultz, who are part of that team. I'd also like to thank David Robillard, an Allouez member who is kind of the visionary behind what this development plan could be moving into the future. The economic impact of the repurposing of the Green Bay Correctional Facility is a project of communio. It's a project of partnership with the village of Allouez, our neighbor. The village of Allouez is fortunate to have the visionary leadership of Brad Lang, the village administrator, and Jim Rafter, the president of the village board. Brad and Jim, thank you for your partnership and your leadership on this project. Thank you all for being here this morning as we share this report. And Jim, I'd like to turn it over to you to make some comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wegge. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And thanks to those of you who have been following this story for quite some time. Today is yet another step on the way to hopefully closing GBCI and coming up with a very exciting property in the village of Allouez. I'd like to thank Dr. Wegge and the whole St. Norbert staff for hosting this press conference, but more importantly, being a great partner in helping the village of Allouez create a vision for the future. I'd like to thank the press once again. Today is just an update on a 2-year-long project. The project has been talked about to close GBCI, build a new prison elsewhere, and repurpose the property upon which GBCI sits today. A lot of work has been gone into place over the last 2 years, and many people have been part of this story so far. I'd like to thank our state legislators, Representative David Steffen and Senator Rob Coles. I'd like to thank our county representatives who are here today, Dr. Paul Ballard and Joan Brusky, as well as Troy Streckenbach, who is not here today, and the entire county board. I'd like to thank a very hard-working Village of Allouez staff led by Brad Lang and Trevor Fuller, who has been a very important part of this project. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank my fellow trustees for having the vision, and Ms. Penny Dart, who is here with us to join us today. But they say it takes a village. I can tell you a project like this takes more than a village. It takes a village, it takes a county, and it takes a state, and it takes a lot of people who get excited about good things that happen. There are many reasons that you've heard over the last couple of years to close GBCI. I won't get into all of them, but if you break them into three, it is safety, fiscal responsibility, and economic development. We're here today to talk about the economic development. The Village of Allouez has tried to do its part to help our state leaders understand that if they choose to close GBCI, that we are ready to take it over and do something great with it. To that effort, we have gone through, first of all, having workshops with our residents, and then turning those workshops into a vision. We are very lucky to have in our midst today Mr. David Robillard, who has been kind enough on behalf of the village as a volunteer to come up with a beautiful vision for the future. And I want to emphasize it's a vision. It's not what's going to happen, but it's what could be there. And as we go around the county and around the area talking about the vision, I can tell you there's a lot of excitement for it. I see Jamie Celine from the chamber here today in charge of many things at the chamber, one of which is the young professionals group within Brown County. And the young professional group has said, with a great deal of excitement, how do we help and how do we get it here? So it's a great opportunity, and I'd like to thank everyone who's done anything to help us get there. We've also circulated a petition, and in a very short period of time got over 1,000 signatures from area residents and 150 local business owners, all of whom support the effort. And lastly, to prove that if we close it, something can be done, we have hired St. Norbert College and the Center for Economic Excellence to conduct an economic impact study, and that's why we're here today. So why are we here? We're here to see what will a development like this do for the future of not only Allouez, but our entire area. As Dr. Wegge said, this was done in about 2 months period of time. So the man who's coming up and speaking after me should get a great deal of applause, as well as his staff, because they've spent their summer doing this project. I won't tell you what the CBEA is because Dr. Wegge already did, but by way of introduction, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Mark Shaffer. He's an associate professor of economics here at St. Norbert. He's the director of the Center for Business and Economic Analysis. He has a BA from Augustana College. He has a master's in applied economics from Western Michigan University and a doctorate in applied economics in Western University. Mark's completed his undergraduate work at Augustana and Rock Island and received a PhD in applied economics from Western Michigan University. His graduate studies specifically concentrated in monetary economics and econometrics or something like that. Prior to a career in academia, Mark worked in finance for both a fund company and as an institutional investment manager. Aside from teaching courses in macroeconomics, international finance, and money and banking, Mark conducts research on the behavior of financial intermediaries and their impact on economic activity. So without further ado, I would like you to give a warm welcome to Dr. Mark Shaffer.
Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. Continue with the round of thank yous. I'd like to thank Brad and Jim for all their work with this project, as well as my two co-authors, Dr. Sandro Drzinski and Alexa Scholze. Without their help, this could not be possible. I'd also like to thank Mr. David Robillard, whose work on this project makes this entire thing possible, as our analysis could not be done if we didn't have a plan to effectively analyze. So what I want to do this morning is just give you a quick overview of what the project was, what it tells us, and also what it doesn't tell us, and then briefly review the plan, and then highlight the keys of our analysis. All right? So as we all know, and Jim set up very nicely, the conversation that's currently happening is what to potentially do with this site. Do we put in funds to modernize the existing facility or move the facility to a new location and build a new state-of-the-art version of a prison. Where our study comes in is not to analyze that question at all. Our study is actually about helping give information to assist with that cost-benefit decision. So effectively what we did is tried to look at and answer the question, if the prison were to be moved and that site were to be decommissioned and opened up for economic development, what could be there and what could be the economic impact of something being put there, which is the scope of what we effectively have analyzed. That being said, in order to conduct this study, the Village of Allouez met with Mr. Robillard, and they presented about a month and a half ago this amazing conceptual plan that I'll briefly review for you guys in a few minutes. But it must be stressed that all of the numbers we're talking about and everything pertaining to this plan are basically about this one particular conceptual plan that's been developed. So there's a ton of possibility and a ton of vision pertaining to what could be here. Our analysis is based on the conceptual plan that was brought together for purposes of this project and that vision. So this is the conceptual plan. For those of you who were not at the previous press conference at the Village of Allouez, I'll give you the 1-minute overview, maybe, if I can possibly do it. There's so much in here. So the picture, first of all, stands for itself. It's a beautiful vision of what could be here. The one thing I'd like to start out by saying is that I think in the construction of this plan, the conversation was about how do we build community where people can live, work, and play. That was sort of the objective, that was the goal, which is what this study was really trying to bring out. So as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of open park space in this plan. This large rectangular, I suppose to bring back geometry skills, trapezoid, is basically about 50 acres, and the conceptual plan also talks about bringing in the riverfront property that's currently owned by the Wisconsin DNR to add another 14 acres. So we're looking at about 64 acres of potential development. In this plan, I'll just start with this first section here. A lot of open park space in this current parcel. Ton of amenities in there, volleyball courts, tennis courts, rock climbing wall. There's even, if you look very closely, the fun zip line here. There's a little person hanging, you probably can't see them. In addition to all those sort of public park spaces where people can gather, we also have a boutique hotel with a breakfast cafe there and a nice frontage walkway space for outdoor events, farmers markets, car shows, etc. As you move into the existing GBCI site, this is our main building in the GBCI site that would largely stay as a historical marker and be renovated in the inside. There's a host of things in here, prison museum, industrial office space, a restaurant, some kiosks, things of that nature. As you go down the spine of this facility, there's a nice large event rotunda, wedding space, venues, etc., as well as a gym and health center facility in there. As we shift further back into the plan, this row of buildings here is effectively the hub of retail space, if you will, about 20 retail buildings in there, in addition with a coffee shop, a mini grocery store, and then sort of the cornerstone of this would be a distillery or brewery style restaurant that would open up into this wonderful park pavilion space here. As you see, as you go back here, there's a nice water feature that sort of ties this entire back area together with a host of pop-up shops, pop-up eateries, if you will. And then down here, you're looking at a bank of condo and townhouse units, as well as some apartment buildings here, making up the bulk of the residential space. And up here, we have a three-pack of three-story buildings that would be retail space, corporate office space, as well as some high-end luxury lofts. If you shift all the way to the riverfront property, this is going to be an area that really ties the community together along the Fox River Trail. We have a performance amphitheater, a nice water feature, a very large gazebo tying right into the trail. This would be like an event venue for weddings, restaurants, etc., and some high-end condo duplexes there right on the water. So I can't take credit for any of this. This is all the vision of Mr. David Robillard and the stakeholders who provided him some insight from the Village of Allouez. So our job then with the CBA was to really take this plan and try and get an idea for what could this mean in terms of the economy for our Brown County region. That was what we were tasked with. Now for us to do that, what we really needed, and what Mr. Robillard was nice enough to share with us, is an idea of well, what is the physical space we're talking about that we can put economic entities in? So if you want to break down the plan quickly, we sort of categorize it as sort of residential space, commercial office space, hospitality style venues, retail, and retail restaurants. So you can see there's going to be a tremendous amount of residential space in this plan, as well as a tremendous amount of office space. So using this as our basis, what we did is conducted an economic impact study. In particular, we tried to figure out realistically 5 key pieces of information. We wanted to figure out how many jobs could this potentially employ on our site. We wanted to figure out what potential income could be generated from this site, labor income to individuals, and then what's the economic activity or output, sales, revenues, et cetera, and then get to property valuation, as well as, of course, the tax revenue piece kicked off of that property valuation, which is a very important consideration. Couple of quick disclaimers before I jump into some of the results. First things first, all the numbers I'm talking about today are really talking about the economic impact on the county, Brown County itself, not just the village or not any of the cities, the whole county. So all those numbers are relevant to that. Also, all the numbers I'm presenting today are in current dollars, making the case that if this existed today, this is what this would look like. In the study, we go deeper into inflation adjustments and things like that, but for our purposes today, we'll focus on what it would look like today. The other thing that is just operational, I guess, is every economic impact study basically has 3 things that you're trying to estimate. The first thing is, what is the actual jobs, what is the actual income, and what is the actual economic activity from this operation? Of course, in this case, we don't have any of that because this doesn't exist. So the first part of our study was actually trying to, using a variety of approaches, build estimates based on the physical space of how many jobs we think we can employ in this amount of commercial office space, and what is the number of people that can be employed in this type of restaurant or that type of restaurant. So a lot of what we did was actually build out comparables to different existing restaurants, retail shops, office space in our area, and create calculations based on square footage, and then project estimates based on what we currently see based on comparable existing economic enterprises. That being said, using that information, we got an idea of what the actual direct, sort of actual jobs on the space would be, actual income and actual activity. And then we did the economic impact part, which is then looking at what are the subsequent multiplier effects of that happening. And this is, to use an example, the plan calls for a little coffee shop. Let's suppose that coffee shop can generate $1 million a year in revenue. If it does that, they're also spending money at local businesses in our area, and they're also paying, let's say, 12 people to work in that coffee shop. They're paying them income, which is then spent in the economy as well. So once we get past the direct effect, then we have that extra spending multiplies through the economy to create more revenue, more jobs, more income. So everything I'm presenting today in terms of economic impact is going to give like a direct number, and then what the total impact would be once we account for multiplication in the economy. So let's just get to the fun stuff. We'll get right to the punchline. After looking at all those different areas and all those different spaces, our initial estimates for this particular conceptual plan suggest that this site can employ roughly 1,040 people. Those jobs are both full-time and part-time jobs combined in there. So about 1,040 people, pay out roughly $39.6 million in income, and generate nearly $80 million of economic activity happening on that site. When we look at the multiplier effects for Brown County as a whole, we estimate that this actual site could be responsible for as many as 1,463 jobs in the Brown County region, as well as about 59.2 or 60 million in labor income, and about $138.5 million of economic activity in our Brown County area. Suffice it to say, given its current function as a prison, this is a very different look at what could be there going from a prison to all this economic activity. The next thing we wanted to look at for our study, and this is the very important question when we think about the government side, is what is the potential property valuation? Of course, we care about this largely because we know it can kick off potential tax revenue, which can go to our local village, it can go to local school districts, local technical college, and the county. This, of course, is a very challenging thing to do, given the fact that this doesn't exist yet. So what we did in terms of this approach, we did a number of things to make sure we had a good understanding of potential ranges of valuation. So we used something called a capitalization rate approach, but what we did is we chose a bunch of different estimates that would be high-end assumptions and low-end assumptions, because again, we're talking about a site that doesn't exist. It's going to exist in 10 years. So not only did we do high-end and low-end estimates of potential rates to do this assessment, we also did high-end and low-end estimates of potential income that these properties could generate. When we look at that information, this particular conceptual plan shows a low-end estimate of about $46.7 million in valuation and a high-end estimate of about $71 million in property valuation. This is just, though, on the taxable property. So there's a bunch of public space in there that's not even counted in this because it's not going to generate tax revenue. But it gives us sort of this high-end estimate of about $71 million and about a median estimate of about $58.9 million in valuation. Now, one thing just to mention, as I was talking with Brad and Jim and thinking about potential for this site, is this is the estimate of this particular plan. And one of the conversations we had is the property valuation is obviously very sensitive to what is actually in the final version of this plan. So to get a sense for some of that sensitivity, we did just a couple alternatives to give you an idea of potential scope of the site. So one alternative was just taking all of the residential buildings and all these corporate buildings and just adding a floor to them. It adds a little bit more density, adds some more residential space, and we also talked about swapping out potential duplexes for a high-end luxury condo unit right on the water. Now again, realize this is just a slight tweak to the plan, and only in so much that we wanted to see how it could change potential valuation. And when we do that slight tweak to the plan, it adjusts our estimates to a low end of $66 million and a high end of potentially $100.6 million. Now, I can't stress enough that right now, the current site is a state-owned prison that doesn't have a property tax revenue that's kicked off for anyone in the local area. So this is an important thing to stress, and this is why we really, really care about trying to get a sense for this. So if you think about what we just said, this conceptual plan shows a high-end estimate of about $71 million. Some slight tweaks could make this plan potentially $100.6 million, all depending on what, when the process, if the process were to happen and if a site were to truly be developed there, all of that information from stakeholders would be taken in to figure out what we could put there and the potential for valuation. Now, of course, the thing we care about the property valuation for is the tax revenue that could be kicked off from it. So what you're seeing here is a quick table under those assumptions of potential property tax revenue from this site. Specifically, I'll just highlight the key number, the numbers that we reference in particular. But if the site happens to be a valuation of $58.9 million, if that's the actual property valuation, you're looking at new tax revenue to our public and local government and entities of about $1.1 to $1.4 million in new potential tax revenue, which obviously I can't stress how important that's going to be to our local school district, the village, the local technical college, and Brown County itself. Now the study has, there's I think 35 pages of this thing. There's a lot more information here. But again, we just wanted to give you guys a quick flavor of some of the key takeaways for what our study concluded. And if you want to take some notes here, here's basically the key things that to draw out from the potential for this site. Directly can employ about 1,000 people, 1,040, about 40 million in income and 80 million in output from the site itself. Multiplies to Brown County to about 1,500 jobs, about 60 million income and 138.5 million output. In terms of potential property valuation, a high-end estimate of this plan is about $71 million. Some alterations can show this valued at $100 million. It depends on the final site plan. And some really strong potential property tax revenue generated from this for our local entities, $1.4 to $1.5 million in new property tax revenue. So that being said, again, just wanted to give you a quick flavor for the key takeaways. Those are probably the three key bullet point takeaways if I had to distill this down to what this really means for our local community. But I think the last thing I'll say in general is, regardless of what this final plan becomes, if it is eventually a decommissioned site, I think it's important to stress that regardless of what it is, regardless of what the final property valuation is, I mean, the goal here is to build a place where the community can live, work, and play. And I think that's something that is very important that this plan brings out. And I think even bringing that with our results help make the case that this would be a tremendous thing for our local region. That being said, thanks for your time. I think Jim's going to bring up a couple of our speakers. There you go.
Thank you, Mark. Isn't it something how you can take 2 months of hard work and boil it down to about 15 minutes? But you did a great job, and thank you very much. I'd like to invite David and Rob up to join me. Just one little note there. All the jobs, and I don't know if Mark mentioned this or not, but the jobs number, that didn't take into account any construction jobs that would take place or anything. That's once the project was up and running, those were the jobs that would be there. I mentioned earlier on that there's really 3 decisions being made in regards to GBCI. One is the safety of the facility for the prisoners and for the staff, and then the other fiscal responsibility of the upkeep and should we invest money into that property. We happen to have 2 of our representatives here who have been leading the charge for Allouez at the state level, Representative David Steffen and Senator Rob Coles, both of whom are involved in different pieces of the safety and public fiscal responsibility at the state level. So I'd just like to invite them to say a few words.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Just to provide some background and context, this odyssey began 25 months ago when Village President Jim Rafter pulled me aside at a quick trip ribbon cutting to say, hey, is there any way we could ever find a way to close down that prison and provide some economic development opportunity for our great community? And at the time, I certainly understood and appreciated the interest, but was aware that this had been tried before. And so I made it incredibly clear to him that first and foremost is that the data will drive the decision on whether or not this is even entertained. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time researching it down in Madison with the various staff at Department of Corrections, Department of Administration, my own staff, and then also identified previously done independent studies of GBCI, in which $250,000 was spent through a company called Mead and Hunt to evaluate an inflation-adjusted deferred maintenance cost that exists at GBCI of $200 million. And so the numbers were certainly showing that there was value in exploring this for the taxpayers. And so began the process with the policy to close down GBCI, provide $150 million of taxpayer savings, create a safer, better environment for the workers who are there, and also provide some recidivism reduction programming, mental health services for the inmates who are there. In addition to it being a data-driven decision, I also made it incredibly clear that this would be different than every other attempt that has been done in relation to this facility. We were going to have to be collaborative, comprehensive, and incredibly vocal. And that is what this is today. It's a culmination of activity that has been underway for many, many months. Started obviously with the policy that I worked on a year and a half ago relating to this. We worked to have the data put together to show that this made sense fiscally for the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, we're finding out more about what it can do for the village of Allouez. And we did a lot to get the community involved. We made sure that we made this available for them to be engaged in terms of having a great plan through a volunteer, David Robillard, and then having them have an opportunity to speak to say, do you like this or not? And it was overwhelming. So in summary, the policy has been written, the plan has been developed, the people have spoken, and now the proof has been released. We have what we need to move this plan forward. The village of Allouez deserves this. Brown County deserves this. The state of Wisconsin needs this. And so we have a great opportunity to move forward. And as the next steps, we have now made an incredible case for the governor of the state of Wisconsin. We have put it all together, packaged it nicely with our work here today. And now the next step is to meet with him and say, Governor, this is a great opportunity. Save the taxpayers of the state of Wisconsin $150 million over the next decade. Provide a safer, better environment for workers and inmates through a new facility for the maximum security operations. and finally provide the village of Allouez what it deserves, a $100 million economic development future. And so I'm very thankful to my colleagues, Senator Coles, President Rafter, St. Norbert College, of course, David Robillard for his effort, and for the media for being helpful in getting out the word on this incredible opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks for your leadership, Dave, and Jim for pushing. We've seen what could happen here if a number of steps take place, and I want to thank Mark and Sandra and Alexa and Dave, who I've known for quite a while, for the great work in the Schneider Center. I have an appreciation for the good work of St. Norbert College. I have two excellent staffers that have worked for me for several years, and I expect you'll be generating many more graduates to help other legislators as time goes by. But this is great work from the Schneider Center. This is an important piece of the overall issue here. We're waiting for two big components to come out in the months ahead. The facilities study that was approved in the state budget. We expect to get that in the next couple of months, and what will that do? That will look at all the aging prisons and give a guide plan for the legislature and the governor to, what are we going to do? We're 140% over capacity in the whole system. We know something has to be done. We know we've got some old facilities that are sucking a lot of cash from the taxpayer. Something has to be done. So we're laying, thanks to the Schneider Center and these gentlemen behind me who have taken the primary lead on this, and other people in the room, we've shown what can happen in economic development if you get away from an 1898. Who was out there in 1898? Well, City of Green Bay was there, and there was probably a cornfield and a few trees, not much in Allouez. De Pere was there. So it made a lot of sense in 1898. Doesn't make a lot of sense in 2018. So I think we're realistic. This is going to take a few years. This isn't going to happen right away. But everything that's been done up to this point, I think, moves us in the direction of a better economic outcome and saving a bunch of taxpayer dollars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now I'd invite Mark up and open it up to any questions.
They've been
Any
answered.
questions?
They're all answered.
We'll do them after, yeah,
Okay.
with the microphone.
Okay, well then we'll close our press conference, but I'd like to thank you all for being here. Thank you to everyone who's helped. And David, just stand up for a second. We're going to put a statue of him up in the front. Thank you very much, folks.